They told her, "Your son will never speak." Doctors gave up. Relatives lost hope, but this mother refused to quit. And then, one moment changed everything. A miracle happened. She held her baby and felt the world shrink to the size of his tiny fingers. He was warm. He was quiet. He was perfect to her. The room smelled like soap and new life. Outside, the evening light pressed softly through the window. She smiled and whispered his name even though he could not understand. She told him he was wanted. She told him he was safe. The first days were a blur, feeding, changing, not sleeping. She moved like a small boat on a wide ocean. Waves rose, waves fell. She watched the rise and fall of his chest and counted it like prayer beads. When he cried, she held him close. When he slept, she traced the soft curve of his ear. She dreamed about his first word. She imagined the sound. Mama. It would be the whole sky to her. Months passed. He did not giggle like her friend's baby. He did not babble. He stared at lights. He loved the ceiling fan. He would flap his hands. He would tap the same corner of the table. He was sweet and calm most days. But sound did not come. Not even little sounds. Not the ones that tumble out by accident when the mouth is new to the world, she asked the nurse. The nurse said every child is different. She asked the doctor. The doctor said, "Let us wait a little more." She asked her mother. Her mother said, "Some boys are late. Do not worry." She tried not to worry. But worry grew like ivy. It found the cracks in her hope and crawled through. On his first birthday, she set a small cake on the table. Blue frosting. A candle like a bright seed. Family came. Faces, voices, laughter. Everyone looked at the boy. Everyone waited for a sound, a clap, a shout. He touched the frosting with one finger. He looked at the candle. He did not smile. He did not make a sound. Someone coughed. Someone said, "It's nothing." Someone else said, "He will talk one day." Then a relative she barely knew leaned in too close and said in a low voice, "Maybe he will never speak." The words fell like stones in her chest. She took the candle out and pressed it into a napkin so she would not cry in front of the boy. Later that night, she sat on the floor with him and rolled a small ball back and forth. She said, "Ball, ball, ball." She opened her mouth wide so he could see. She touched his lips and smiled. He blinked and looked at the ball and rolled it back. At the clinic, a white room hummed with machines. The doctor flipped through papers and asked questions. Does he respond to his name? Sometimes. Does he point? Not really. Does he imitate sounds? No. The doctor's face was calm. The doctor's voice was even. He spoke about tests and scales and charts. He said some children have delays. He said sometimes there are deeper things. He said, "Prepare your heart." He said your son may never speak. She heard the words. She also heard the clock ticking. She stared at the doctor's pen moving. She felt the floor 3 inches lower than it should be. She nodded because that is what you do when you are still on a chair and the world is slipping. She took the pamphlet. She thanked the doctor. She walked out with her son in her arms and the pamphlet in her bag and the sentence in her bones. Relatives called. Some were kind, some were not. One said to accept fate. One said to see a holy man. One said to try a special oil. One said to be realistic. They used that word like a door they could close and walk away from. She listened. Then she stood by the window with the boy and watched the street outside until the sky turned the color of lemons. She whispered, "I hear you even when you do not speak. I am your voice until yours arrives." Tomorrow, she said to herself. Tomorrow. I start. She wrote a list. She wrote hearing test. She wrote speech therapy. She wrote playtime. She wrote music. She wrote patience. She wrote, Faith. She hung the list on the wall with tape and stood back. It looked small. It looked possible. They checked his ears. The machines made soft beeps. The man in a white coat moved a tiny probe. The boy sat on her lap and stared at a spinning toy. The results were fine. He could hear. That gave her a strange joy and a new fear. If he could hear, then why not words? She told herself not to ask the wind for reasons. She told herself to work. She searched online at night. She watched videos. She found mothers who had walked this road. She saw their tired eyes. She saw their bright eyes, too. She filled a notebook with ideas. Flashcards. Simple signs. Hand over hand. Guidance. Games that teach breath. Blowing bubbles. Blowing feathers. Humming. Imitation. Turn, taking. Naming. Choices. 2 cups. Which do you want, apple or banana? She wanted to turn the world into small doors he could open. Money was tight. She sold a bracelet her father had given her. She sold a chair nobody used. She stopped buying little treats for herself. She packed rice and lentils into jars and made them last. She took a cleaning job at night while an aunt watched the boy. She walked home when the buses were done for the day. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. But every coin felt like a seed. She put them in a jar named Therapy. She shook the jar and listened to the soft clink like rain. The first speech therapist was gentle. She sat on the carpet with the boy and rolled cars and made sounds. Vroom. Beep. Pop. She showed him how to shape his lips. She clapped when he looked at her mouth. She praise-whispered when he made any sound, even a breath. The boy watched. He did not imitate. He liked to spin a wheel on the toy truck. He liked the way light flashed off the shiny rim. The therapist smiled at the mother and said, "This is a long road, but we walk it together." Weeks turned to months. Each session ate money and gave back inches. Not miles. Inches. The boy learned to look when his name was called. Sometimes. He learned to tap a picture when he wanted water. Sometimes. He learned to smile at peekaboo. That smile was a light that reached every room of the mother's heart. Neighbors talked. Some meant well. Some meant harm and hid it in advice. She nodded and closed the door and lay on the floor with her son and showed him how to push a toy. Train. She said, "Chew." She said it again. He placed his hand on her lips. He was curious about sound. He was curious about how a mouth became a tunnel for air and meaning. She kissed his palm and tried again. Chew, chew, chew. She put labels around. The house, cup, door, bed, light. She pointed and said the words slowly. She made them like songs. She danced with him in the kitchen and sang his name. She sang when she washed dishes. She sang even when tears came. She didn't hide tears from the sink, but she did hide them from him. He saw her smile. He saw her. Steady hands. At night, she wrote letters she did not send. Dear doctor, dear relative, dear stranger who said my son is broken. She wrote until the words cooled. She folded the letters and put them in a shoebox. On the lid, she wrote, "Not today." She fell asleep with her hand on the boy's shoulder and dreamed of a field where words grew on trees and children picked them like fruit. One morning, she brought home a small keyboard someone was giving away. Keys were missing. The power cord was taped. She set it on the floor and pressed a key. A thin note rose like a bird made of tin. The boy turned his head. She pressed another key. Another thin bird. He crawled closer. He touched the keys. He pressed one. His face did not change, but his body leaned toward the sound. She played simple patterns. He placed his ear close to the speaker and let the notes comb the air. Music became a bridge. She played scales. She played soft rhythms. She clapped. She waited. She clapped again and left a gap. Sometimes he filled the gap with a clap of his own. It was not a word, but it was a conversation. She took it. She stored it in her heart. On his 3rd birthday, she did not invite relatives. She baked a small cake. She placed 3 toy animals in a row. She held each one and said the name: cow, cat, dog. She moved her mouth in slow shapes. He watched. He touched the cow's ear. He touched her mouth. He looked at the window where a patch of sun sat like a friendly cat. She said, cow again. He breathed out. It was a long breath. She almost heard a sound inside it, like the shadow of a word. She gasped, then smiled at herself. Hope could play tricks, but hope could also train the ear to hear the seed under the soil. She met a mother at the clinic who said, keep going. The other mother's son had started to say small words at 5. She held on to that story. She held it like a rope. She told herself that rope did not mean she was falling. It meant she was climbing, even when there was no cliff, even when the mountain was not outside but inside the space between expectations and love. Time made a small circle and moved around her days. Morning exercises, flashcards, tea, work, therapy, dishes, laundry, play, music, sleep. She stuck to routines because they gave the boy a map. Maps made him calm. Calm made him open to the world. Sometimes he screamed. The world was loud, lights were harsh, textures were wrong, voices were too close. She learned to read his signs. She learned to leave the store before the lights crushed him. She learned to carry noise-canceling headphones in her bag. She learned to breathe slowly so he could watch and copy. She learned to say less and show more. In the yard, children ran and shouted. He watched from the step. His hands flapped. When the wind moved the leaves, she sat beside him and did not push. She rolled a ball to him. He let it roll past. She rolled it again. He placed his foot on it and felt the roundness. She said ball as softly as air. He looked at her mouth, and then at the sky, and then at the leaf that fell into his lap like a green whisper.